Hi, everyone. I'm Davy Jags, and this is Sparkle On. Sparkle is your happiness, passion, and self-worth, and that is found through the power of creativity. Today, I have a really awesome guest, Shana Stein. She's a director and has also recently executive produced on multiple episodes of the highly anticipated sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, Hulu's The Testaments. She's also directed a couple of encore episodes for The Boys and is known for different shows like 56 Days on Amazon Prime, Jack Ryan, and Lincoln Lawyer. Thank you, Shana, for joining the show.
Someone upstanding and I'm shouting out.
Thanks again for joining the show. We'll dive right in. I really am fascinated to understand what is the process for being chosen for these type of TV shows that you've worked on, and how have your personal interests led you to where you are at in your career today?
Well, thank you again so much for having me. It's a real honor to be here. And that's a great question. How are we chosen? There's a complicated process that you've got to get approved by the studio and the network, and then the showrunners. And there needs to be a certain alignment there, I think. And then you meet with people. So if you haven't worked with people before and you're kind of starting from scratch, it is based on, they'll look at your demo reel or your body of work, and the agents will get in there and pitch away and do their best to say why you're the best person for this. For me, because I worked as a producer for so many years, I really came to appreciate when people would be pitched specifically for projects as to why they were right and what their strengths were, and then maybe what part of it might be a stretch or something new for them. And I didn't feel it was necessary to hire somebody who's an absolute shoo-in. It's sometimes great to have people that there's an aspect that's new, or that it'll be a new challenge for them to kind of, everybody always wants to be learning something and growing and having new experiences, right? So it's a combination of all of those things. And it's really a kismet when all of these things have to come together at the right time, In the case of Testaments, I met on this project. I met Bruce Miller and Maya Goldberg and Jana Sobel. I met the three of them together a week after the election.
Wow, that's intense.
The most recent election. And given the history of The Handmaid's Tale, when it came out after the election of 2016, and then so going into the election of the 2024 election, a lot of my friends my age, people were feeling pretty beaten down. We were seeing a lot of like women's rights and LGBTQ and just really all of the underrepresented people, like a lot of motion towards taking some of those rights away. And people were feeling pretty beaten down and depressed. And the night of the election, both of my teenage children, who were 15 and 17 at the time, were both crying after the election. But what I saw the next day is my daughter immediately was posting about how it was important to keep up the good fight and to not give up and to not let the darkness win. And she came from this really bright, hope-filled, energetic place of youth. And my son went to school and somebody was wearing a MAGA hat. And he goes to a uniform school where you're not allowed to really wear any political stuff. And so the teachers told them to take it off, and the kid went and pretended to go put, and then came back out with it again. And my son told the story of how he went up to him and said, "Why are you wearing that hat?" And he said, "Because I love Trump." And he says, "Well, why do you love Trump?" And he said, "Well, because I think he'll be good for the economy." And my son said, "Well," and I pointed out to him, "What part of the economy? Because in the last, 8 Democratic presidents, the employment rate went up X amount, and it's like for the middle class or and so he started spewing all these facts at this kid that blew this kid's mind, and the kid had nothing to come back at. And then he said, I think he'll be good for immigration. And my son said, if you think he'd be good for immigration, then why do you think that he put political pressure on senators and in the Republican congressmen to not put forward the bipartisan immigration bill that was up a year before the election, if not to politicize the subject? And he just kind of came at him with facts. And then he said, one of the kids were starting to gather around, and one of the kids came up and said, Trump's a rapist. And my son said, I didn't engage in that, because Mr. Kruger, my 5th grade teacher, taught me that when you're debating somebody and they come in at a 10, you meet them at a 5, and like to de-escalate the situation and try to reach across. And I was listening to this kid, this 15-year-old, 14-year-old, like he turned 15 2 weeks after the election, kid. And I was like, gosh, youth. It's like the youth is the hope and the energy of youth is our future. And the fact that these kids are still out there fighting the good fight, whatever side you believe in.
Right.
But even that he was trying to like kind of reach across to the other side and engage in conversation and have thoughtful debate instead of hateful debate, and it just gave me so much hope. So those things happened. And then I went in and met on the Testaments. And
Wow.
so, we went in, and to me, the Testaments, the difference between The Handmaid's Tale and Testaments, because the Handmaid's Tale, admittedly, a lot of people were like, it was very difficult. It was hard to watch. It was, it was traumatic to watch women going through that at a time when these things were happening in our country and mirroring it. And what I liked about the Testaments so much is that it did have that energy of youth and the rebellion of youth. And it was a journey where The Handmaid's Tale was women who had stuff and had it taken away. These were young women who had been born into this system, hit their teen years where they start to just have that natural rebellion of youth and know things can get better. And then, of course, through the book, we know that this is close to the end of Gilead.
Right.
Gilead eventually does come down. So the journey was one that I was really, really interested in. And so I kind of went into that meeting with that passion and with that personal connection, and being a mother of teens and being a woman. And I took all of those things into this meeting. That's why it was really important for me, I thought, to work on this project. And so I went in with a personal passion.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I find very fascinating about studying artists and their process and also their life's inspiration is that connection to youth, their inner child. One of the things that I found fascinating is, especially with TV and your particular schedule, right? You're working on multiple projects at a time. And I think any artist does understand that, right? But specifically, I get very immersed in my characters' heads, right? And so I'm curious, what is your practice for entering these different worlds? And it's fascinating because, in real life, we're kind of mirroring this with the Testaments and Handmaid's Tale a little bit, but specifically these dystopian type worlds. Was there a specific thing that you had to do to kind of embody this for not just yourself, but also your cast that you're leading?
Well, it is, you have to understand, I think we break it down into each individual element. Each cast member, each character does see it very differently. And in the Testaments, there are different stages.
Right.
There's Agnes, who was, is the daughter of June and has been, she already clearly had some trauma as a young child where she was ripped away, whether she remembers it or not. And then she had her first adoptive mother, who in this particular telling was more caring. Now she's got this stepmother. But so her history is very different than Shunammite, who was born into privilege in this world and didn't have any of those particular experiences. And then Becka, who was born into it, but not as much privilege. And she's got very different needs and desires. And, being queer, she doesn't want to be forced to marry any man.
Right.
And knowing that, that they call the queer community, they're gender traitors and that it's punishable by death. And so as she's discovering, so each person's on their own journey, right? And you just look at what that is and what the stakes are of those things and take it from there.
And this cast is very young. And some of them, it's only their first, second couple titles that they've ever worked on. And for such an intense show, what is that like in your role? And how are you serving not only as a mentor, but someone that is guiding them in their first Hollywood experience that may be different than what you experienced when you first, started doing this work?
Well, they're all really quite accomplished and very mature young women, and each one of them has their own process. So for me, I just try to respect what their process is. I always think my job as a director is to create a safe space for the actor to do their magic.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's also, I think, very important to walk them through at the end of the day, shaking it off. Just
Yeah.
like, that was great. You did our thing. We're just playing make believe for a living with Matea, who had a very intense arc in the block that I directed,
Yes.
playing Becka. And I actually worked with Matea the first time when she was 10 years old. We worked together on a show called Power. And so it was really special to get to work with her on this block. And she's such an incredible actress. And so it was a real, real pleasure. And it just felt like a gift from the universe that I got to do this block with her. And I think she's so special. And we have had a really great relationship to do that. And also Isolde, who plays Hulda, this was a big, big block for her.
Mm-hmm.
And she, goes and experiences and goes through her trauma. And so it's with each of them, they're very different actors and how they approach the material is different. So I think I just try to ask how I can best support each one.
Yeah, and bear with me on this analogy because I felt like when I was going through your work and I was just trying to put myself in your shoes, I used to work in the craft beer industry, and I'm a craft beer snob, right? And one of the qualms that I have is that sometimes I go to other breweries and I'll be able to taste that they use the same yeast strand across different flavor profiles, right? And it messes with the beer. You can't put the same yeast strand in, a stout and the same as an IPA, right? It just doesn't work. And what I found fascinating about, the credits of TV, and this is pretty common across the board, is that you're coming in, like you said, on two very specific pivotal moments in the narrative structure. And I'm wondering in TV, is this almost vital to use different directors, different writers across different episodes because each episode serves its different purpose? And what is that like coming in at one of the most pivotal parts where the foundation has been laid and you're working off of the collaboration of other people?
Well, I was very fortunate in that I was the producer and director on the series. So I was around the entire season. So I
Mm-hmm.
did get to see what was happening and developing with the other episodes of the Testaments and really experience the arc that they were going through, even though the cuts weren't out yet. I love what you're saying about the yeast and the strain because I fully understand that it's a very different thing. So shooting the Testaments and shooting the boys back to back,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of elements that they have the same. In your case, they're both beer,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
both shows. Um, and they're both dealing with a lot of political commentary and in a slightly alternative universe. It's not, it's not America 2026
Right.
and 20, but they are slightly heightened and the way they do things. But the shooting style is very different in the two shows. And so you just know which paintbrushes you have in your
Mm.
toolkit to pick with. So the boys is very handheld, chasing the action. It wants to feel almost like they were caught in the moments. It's deceptively complicated to shoot. It's supposed to feel very easy breezy and like found in
Mm-hmm.
the moment, whereas the the Testaments, it starts off with a very formal, composed exterior with these big, beautiful, wide shots, a lot of symmetry, using a lot of overhead circles. There's some repetitive stuff that was set up from the pilot forward, like setting the style of the show. And then, but these handheld close-ups for when you do get inside, the interior of it. And so much of the show is in voiceover.
Yep.
And a lot of the voiceover is rewritten as post goes on, like they continue to adjust and change the voiceover. So it's interesting to watch how that evolves. But for me in this block, there's a slower, more deliberate pace at the beginning.
Yep.
And the pacing that was in the first few episodes is very different than the pacing through episodes 8 and 9, where I am as the tension is ratcheting up and things are happening, and it building to the culmination of Becca. Spoiler alert, if you haven't watched it, stop watching now, but Becca killing her father,
Yeah.
right? So that, like, building up to that moment. And so we, worked with the Marc Laliberté, the incredibly talented DP who did such beautiful work, but working together of how do we maintain the style of the show, but really have Becca's journey do what's true to telling that story, and working in that realm.
Yeah, I had a very visceral experience to how this tension built, specifically with the testaments, and where I think what you said about the wide shots and everything is very different from action like in The Boys. But with my experience watching the testaments, it was like my anxiety level, if you will, was already up here because it is a sequel, right? We know what The Handmaid's Tale is about. It's not like the same. I was joking around with my boyfriend. I was like, yeah, you're not going to get this addictive feeling like Coco Melon that kids have in that reaction, or like what I had, like this, oh my gosh, this terrible binge watching in COVID to Riverdale. It wasn't that, because the expectation was already injustice and violence. So you have almost this wall up where I felt like entering the pilot, I was Daisy, right? But then as the narrative moved forward, you entered into this childlike psyche of Agnes and the other characters, because you were immersed in this world, but then you also followed their awakening. And so when Becca was coming to this awakening, it was like, oh wait, is she going to do this? And it was like, yeah, she's going to do this. And it plays with your mind, right? Of, we don't want these women to experience violence, but then their reaction to violence is violence. It really, I think, creates this sort of climax that you should have known that you were going to go there as an audience member. But I wanted to know, specifically because you're creating this new journey for these characters aside from Handmaid's Tale, but also in conjunction, what is the process and the way that you got to experience with creating something new?
Well, in to break it down, I guess we'll just get as specific as we can with that in terms of creating something new. So in this moment, and off of what you're talking about, the violence coming out of violence. They were raised in this incredibly violent, vengeful, punishing world.
Right.
So Becca has been taught that, this is what happens to people who do these things. They are killed and they are torn apart. So she's doing God's work. Yeah. She's not waiting for the system to do it, but she does it herself. And she says she does it for her best friend and who she's in love with. Breaking this sequence down, it was like, how do we do this in a way that's different? And then the writers had put in the Murat Sad, which, is a beautiful and very artistic analogy of, of the story of Murat Sad and then the painting. So we tried to mimic that in the final frame of him dead in the water. If you compare that to the painting, The Death of Murat, you'll see that we echoed that framing. And when Agnes turns her over to her parents, where she really thinks they're sending a doctor, but then they send the eyes and they send the female prison guards. And that's something we'd never seen before. So, in working with Leslie, the costume designer, who's Leslie Kavanaugh, who did such brilliant work creating this new version of Gilead. Working with that, so she did them in this all black, and then with their mesh face masks for their kind of SWAT gear for when they're going in for
Right.
their attacks. And I thought, like, what's the difference between we've seen so much violence and men perpetrating violence on women, but we haven't seen women on other women in this particular way. So I worked with them and then the stunt coordinator of how my concept was, I was like, how the difference between women and how would a group of women overtake a woman? And it's not brute strength, but it is almost how it's a mirror of, there's this whole like, girls get it done kind of vibe going on here. It's like the power of girls together. But also when women work together,
Yeah.
it can be used for good or evil. And in this particular case, like none of these women is particularly strong and overpowering her, but they work together as a group as well. And so I wanted them to move differently than men move, and almost like the Russian dancers, where you just don't see their feet move. They just kind of come in, and I described it like, let's do it like a wave that envelops Becka. And then she's just getting tossed and turned over the wave as she's kicking and screaming, going towards it, instead of a man, the way that we've seen the prison guards come up, like arm back,
Yeah.
hands behind your back, and like shove somebody in. They kind of, they come in and they surround Becka and work together as a group to carry her away. And so they're all in black and it's dark outside. So she really pops and stands out as she's getting literally swept away, is how we approached that. So it was something that hadn't been done in the world of Gilead and The Handmaid's Tale, with new characters, these female prison matrons, and with this new thing. And then we echoed back to The Handmaid's Tale when she goes inside and she's pounding on the glass.
Yeah.
To echo back to when that happens with June, when she sees Hannah, back in the show. So it's a combination of trying to honor the Handmaid's Tale and the stuff before it, and then how do we bring in something new and kind of keep it alive, but then stay on theme, and it blends all of those things.
No, that's really fascinating. And I'm just curious of what are the ways that you're either coming up with these ideas or studying to find those inspirations around movement. I mean, I feel like that's what I'm taking away from this conversation the most is not just the camera cuts and things like that, but movement seems like a really big part of your process as a director. How do you find that?
I think I do a ton of research, research, and then I kind of let it go, and don't, it's like, if you do your research and you do all of your preparation, then you can like let things go and let stuff come to you. And so I always say, have a plan and then be prepared to pivot and stay really open to wherever the ideas come from. It can come from watching something, it can come from listening to something, it can be from music, it can be, I'm a meditator, it can like go meditate and come out and look at something and have a thought. It can really bubble up from anywhere. And I think that's part of being a creative, right? Is being open to all of that. There are certainly it's like the right brain and left brain aspect of things. And both of these things work. You've got to be able to make the actual blocking work. How do we get from A to B? But I always go on sets and I walk through stuff myself and just read the lines and think what makes sense. But then I try to let the actors, when they come, also bring their experience. And so I feel like if you stay open to the process, really beautiful things can happen.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, obviously movie making, filmmaking, all of it is very collaborative. I'm going to go a little left here with like my latest obsession is, understanding color and the theory of color, and color plays a big role in the Testaments. But specifically, the internet loves to talk about the Made-for-Hulu look. And it's kind of been this encompassing phrase to talk about color grading specifically across streaming. I've been dying to have someone like yourself break down how color grading has changed over the years, how that plays a role in the tone of a show. But specifically, when you received the script and you're going through it and you're seeing the costumes and all of this stuff for the Testaments, how you utilized color in the way of bringing this to life.
That's such a great question. So in that I was directing more mid-season, but I was producing all season, so I was around for this. There was the pilot director and DP came up with a LUT, which is, we talk about the color grading, which is a certain filter, to break it down into simpler terms, a filter that they have for how they want to photograph things, and putting that filter over everything. And then the colors came from the book, of course, but then the production designer and costume designer worked with the team to we would do camera tests on things and look at stuff, because some tiles that it was like trying to get tiles that will read as green, but not, it's like the right shade of green.
Right.
And then Leslie Kavanaugh, probably, I think she did, there was over like 60 different colors that were tested for these green capes, to get that color that would work with the LUT and the look that they had there. So it's very collaborative, and you really need all departments to participate, in getting that unified look. But for me, it's each show, it's like, is it slightly desaturated? Is it highly saturated? I think in terms of how it's evolved over the years, in the most simplistic terms, things that are like your set and where you are, it's like very saturated and poppy and beautiful color. And you've got like a nice textural tone there. You've got, the trees behind you and the purples and the blues, and that just gives off a happy vibe. So that's a great thing for Sparkle, right? So like you've got a color story that you're telling there. I've got the story here of like, I can't let you see any of this stuff behind me because there's a very strong NDA that Amazon and Sony, I have to hide all the fun storyboards and set designs that are on the wall behind me.
Yeah.
And so mine is a very simple, mysterious whiteout version that we have happening here. But in general, like that saturated and poppy color just gives a happier vibe and a happier tone. And in the world of Gilead, it's a little bit more saturated, even though they put these girls in the pinks and the plums. There is a certain, it's beautiful, and it's not as dystopian as The Handmaid's Tale, which was very dark. Everybody wanted this to be brighter, but it also still needed to feel like it spoke to the to the previous one. So it was very interesting, to be around for all of that.
Yeah, no, and I feel like that also brings some of the newness, that this is still a different show, different story that is being told here, and an important one at that. I'm curious to understand how, between all of these projects that you're juggling, you're in different worlds probably every given hour, right? How are you improving your craft as a director? What does that look like? Because I know, being an artist, you have to have that alone introspective time, and how do you practice that?
Well, in television directing, a lot of it is figuring out what the particular puzzle is of that show, right? Every show's got its own style, it's got its own pace, it's got its own it's got its own tone and vibe and its own dynamics. So that always keeps me on my feet. And honestly, some work out better than others. Sometimes you go someplace and it's like, yep, this feels like home. And other times it can be a real challenge trying to, crack the nut and figure out where the landmines are of stuff. So I feel like it's never the same thing twice. If you're going from show to show, like I have been these last few years, and that really kind of, sharpens it keeps all of those things very sharp. In working in the world of the boys, I've done now 3 different shows on the boys, and in Power, I did 4 different shows on Power. And each one of those, and you talk about the Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments. So I've worked on 3 different universes now with spinoffs, which I think is a very
Yeah.
interesting and unique thing. And what I did learn through all of that is like, what's the inherent DNA that people are looking for, that people are going to want to come back for, and what's new and different about this show, and what's going to bring in new viewers, and how can you make this work for people who didn't watch the old show?
Right.
Because not everybody's going to want to binge watch 6 seasons of something before they start something new, in both the case of Power and Handmaid's Tale. And it is a different younger audience, and it's a different thing. So I've been asked on it by a couple of people when I'll do interviews, like, "What's your signature as a director?" And I'm like, that's for television and guest directing on television. Um, the key is to figure out what they love about their show and how to give them more of
Hmm.
what they love, and then try to elevate it. And so that's always what I'm looking at. I'm like, okay, they love this, they love that, they want more of this and less of that. And I try to kind of come in and do that. So it's a lot of fun. And I'm constantly collaborating with new people. On every show I go on, I've had the good fortune of working again with Mark LaLiberte a couple of times, and I worked here as a DP, and Hernan Otaño a couple of times as a DP, and now Ed Pay. So there's a few DPs that I've had the good fortune of working with on multiple shows. But a lot of times it's a whole new team, and it's a new collaboration. And they are bringing their artistry, you're bringing yours. Every time you mix 2 paints together, it's always going to get a slightly different shade. So um, I just try to give people space for them to do their best work, whether it's the actors or the directors of photography or whomever I'm working with,
Did you always
and
want to
support
do
them.
this kind of work?
I did. So when I was 4, I started asking my mom to move to Hollywood. And my parents had just recently divorced, and she'd moved us to her small hometown. And I just, watched the Saturday matinees, and we would go to the movie theater to get air conditioning because we couldn't afford air conditioning at home. So we just go sit at the theater for hours at a time
Wow.
and sneak in from one movie to the next. And it just was so magical to me, this great big world that was out there that I could only, experience. It really felt magical.
Mm.
And um, I have never lost that, I've never lost that gratitude for getting to do what we do. And I say we're the luckiest people in the world because we get to play make believe for a living.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's
so true. And I think, kind of going back to how we started our conversation around, that inner child and being young, we're seeing, the characters in the Testaments go through, like I said, this awakening. What was your awakening? Besides, the fond memories, like what was this kind of spark that you were like, no, I'm going to do this? Did it come in school? Did it come from like just a random opportunity where it helped you connect with that love for sitting in the theater? Or was it kind of just this combination of moments that just compounded?
I think I could point to many moments over my lifetime that
Hmm.
did that. And then also times when I got off track because I was
Mm.
discouraged or told it wasn't possible. You know, Being in a small town, I was like, I didn't even understand. All I could see was like the actors on screens. That was the first thing that I
Right.
responded to, right? And storytelling. And you sit there and you play make believe in your room, and you put on a show with your siblings or your friends down the street or whatever. And I was always the one, I guess, directing, producing that and getting it together, but I would also act in them. But I didn't even think about the directing,
Right.
the directing and producing part of it, because it was just like, how do we get the show put on?
Mm.
And um, I went to theater camp in high school, and I felt for the first time like I'd met my people, because I
Mm.
felt like a little bit like an alien in my small town, and somebody who didn't quite fit in, and in the conservative ways, because those were not we were not aligned.
Mm-hmm.
All love, but it was not,
Yeah.
I was not aligned with the very conservative small Texas town that I lived in.
Uh-huh.
And um, I had a teacher who took me to see a play in San Antonio, which is the big
Mhm.
city near my town, so
Yeah.
just seeing professional theater. And then my dad took me to New York and I saw um, Broadway for the first time, and I saw John Malkovich and Joan Allen doing Burn This, and it blew my mind. And then I saw Mandy Patinkin and Bernadette Peters in Sunday in the Park with George. It was just transformative. And I just felt so inspired. I was like, people can do that. Like
Yeah.
that's what you're capable of. And so I directed my first play in high school. And then, I was very encouraged by Mrs. Kinsing, my teacher in my small town that was like showing me there's bigger things out there. My father um, did not believe in studying in the arts. He was like, it's a hobby, not a career. He works in finance.
Mm-hmm.
Long story short, after starting college on a different track and all of us going through a lot of therapy,
Yeah. Sounds about right.
I right, right. And then and my dad as well. Like God
Mm.
bless him, like he went through a lot himself. And so he understood. And I got to the point where I was like, look, it's my life. I've got to reclaim it, whether you're supportive of it or not. And then he also understood that passion. He was like, look, it is your life. You're right. So you make your decisions and you do your choices. And so then I transferred into NYU, where I studied theater as a major and cinema studies as a minor. And that was another rebirth. It was just like, and I felt like it's amazing and so inspired. And living in New York is incredible and met my people. And it was all great. But I'd done enough therapy at that point to not really want to be an actor anymore. And so
Mm.
I was like, it's a very difficult, like for me, it was a very difficult situation. Also, women, particularly in the 90s, I was like told I got signed by an agent right out of
Mhm.
school. And they were like, you either need to gain weight or lose weight. Like they had no problem talking about women and their bodies.
Mm.
And I had recovered from, I'd recovered, but I was in recovery from an eating disorder. And I was
Mm.
like, that's a very unhealthy, it just was not, it was doing that. And they're like, well, if you're going to be a character actor, so it was like the constant judgment of the looks and the getting out there. I was like, I did not like the business of acting for myself. But I still loved the storytelling and I loved the other aspects of it. And I went to go get a job. I went to work at William Morris because I was like,
Yeah.
I still wanted to work in film. I wanted to work in the business. And I so got a job at an agency.
Yeah.
And from there, I met so many great people. But I started to go down this path that was very corporate, very business. And all of a sudden, I was fast tracked to be an agent. I got a desk really, really quickly. I was in the agent training program. And I kind of felt like my life starting to spiral again a little bit because I was not in alignment with what my creative path was and my
Yeah.
creative purpose. And I just, again, I had this moment of clarity where I was like, I have to make a change and I've got to make a change now. And I took a big risk and I was trying to, I'd heard about AFI for film school and I really wanted to apply there. But my work was so all consuming. A lot of people think like I got into AFI and quit my job, but I didn't. I quit my job so that I could finish my screenplay because I only had 6 weeks left before the deadline
Oh my
for
gosh.
AFI application. And I was like, I've got 6 weeks to get this done, and I've got to get all of this done. So I was like quitting my job. And then through a series of events, it was like my replacement quit. I had to stay on. It was like the tick tock. It was like and but I was doing the artist way through all of this to kind of help lead me to this path. And so I just really drilled down and I got my screenplay in, and it was the only film school I applied to. But I quit and I finished my screenplay and I got it turned in, and I was like, well, I can always go back to waitressing. Like, we'll just see. But like,
Wow.
I knew that that was not the path for me. And I was like, I'd rather, you know, um, be working in the service industry to support my passion than be on a job that was not in alignment with me being able to be creative in the way I wanted to be. And one of the agents pulled me aside before I left and showed me a trailer of a movie of a big client that was at the agency. And they're like, see, this is why you should stay because you can be making deals on movies like this. And I said, thank you for sharing that with me. I said, I look at that and that is inspirational, and I want to be making things like that, not making deals on things like that, you know? And I just felt really solid. And so, I was very fortunate, and I did get into film school, and that started me on a path. But while I was interested in writing and directing, I ended up producing a film by a director that I'd met at William Morris. So I had a very circuitous path, and
Yeah.
it wasn't always about, sometimes it was about taking risks, but the jobs that were put in front of me were not like me making smart choices or interesting choices.
Hmm.
People always say, oh, I'm like, no, it's like you take the job that you can get. And that's where
Right.
it was. It's such a place of privilege to think, be selective about the creative jobs that you have when you're first getting started in this industry,
Hmm.
because I did. I took the jobs that I could get, and so I was very, very fortunate. But along the way, I've had a few great people, and then one of them was Courtney Kemp, who, when I was working with her, um, and she was the one that was like, I'm watching. I was a creative producer for her on all this stuff, and she was like, you should. She's like, do you want to direct? And I was like, I do. And she was like,
Mm.
why aren't you? And I was like, well, because the opportunity has not presented itself, fully yet. And then, if I was totally honest, I said, look, I don't want to, I've seen people get this opportunity and have it not work out. And I didn't, I was like, I needed my job.
Yeah.
I've got kids, I've got, bills to pay, I've got the things, and I don't want to lose the respect of the crew. And it's a big risk, and it's a risk for the studio. And then, so doing that first job was an intensely stressful yet incredibly exhilarating thing. And then when my first cut went into her, she was so wonderfully supportive, as were the cast, and the lead actor, Omari Hardwick, um, asked for me to direct another episode. And then she looked at the cut and she was like, yeah, I want you to direct another episode. And so it was through the support of those people, but all the people around me, the cast, the crew, um, taking that leap of faith, and everybody kind of doing it together. It was a beautiful experience. It was, again, one of so much support and love from everybody around. But I had been shadowing for years at this point. I'd been around,
Right.
so it wasn't my first time on a set. Like,
Right.
directing series television is not an entry-level position. So there was that. And then Courtney was like, I want you to direct and produce on all of her shows. And so I did. I did an overall deal with her, and I did all this, directed and produced on all the spinoffs. And because of the pandemic, we had them spaced out more evenly, but then things got kind of backed up and overlaid. And then when Courtney left Stars and Lionsgate to go to her Netflix deal, I left, and I again took a pretty big risk, which was to leave the Power universe, which was very safe and comfortable and all of those things, to um, know that, like, at this point I'd been on shows for many years and many years. I was like, to go out and take a risk on myself and to say, I just want to try to just direct a bunch of different things, so that I don't get pigeonholed and like, this is your thing. You
Yeah.
do shows about people selling drugs, and you do people, like family dramas. Like, there's a
Yeah.
lot of things that, like, it could get labeled. And
Mm.
I went out and I did action, and I did mystery, and I did, guys on horses in the mountains of Calgary. So it was really wonderful to get to go out and be able to experience all these different things, which was really the life. Going back to that 4 year old, I was like, oh my God, I've shot in Budapest and the Canary Islands, and literally most of the major places in Canada, from Toronto, uh, Montreal, Calgary, Vancouver,
Yeah.
you know, New York, Atlanta, Los Angeles. So I've gotten to see the world and meet hundreds of different people. Every crew you're on is couple hundred new people.
Yeah.
And it's, it's really beautiful.
And
So,
I think, just hearing it's like you've done this great big dance between taking risks and these leaps of faith, but then also, sticking to kind of what it takes to like building that foundation, which I think it's hard for many artists to kind of find that rhythm of, and it's not a blueprint, which I think is so important, kind of what I'm taking away. But I think what I love about your journey, it seems that you've like shape shifted so much to get to where you are now. What are you most proud of in the last 2 years of how you've changed as an artist?
what am I proud of in the last 2 years that I'm most proud of as an artist? Um, I think being okay with letting go
Mm,
when it's not the right path.
mm,
I think so much of this has been, as you say, like so much of this has been, it is a very challenging, it's a hustle. It's a hustle and a struggle and going out and getting that and being okay with letting go of things that are not meant for you.
mm,
That's what I'm most proud of. Because I've had this motto that like say yes until you have to say no.
mm-hmm,
And I think it's now I would change that instead of have to say no, instead of, kind of get to say no. Because again, it's a privilege to be able to say no to any opportunity or any work. It's
mm-hmm,
an absolute privilege.
mm,
And our industry is contracting and it has, it's gone through a contraction and there's less shows now than there were a few years ago and they're doing blocks. So there's fewer people getting employed and I feel super grateful just to be working.
right.
And honestly, the quality of the this or the that, that's all a real privileged place to say. Because just to get to be directing on any show
Mm-hmm,
is there's joy to be found in that.
yeah.
But I had a place this spring where my daughter's a senior in high school, and she was going to be graduating, and I had been away in Canada so much, doing shows that I was really passionate about and believed in, and because I just did Vought Rising, which was the boys prequel,
Yes.
and it's it's beautiful scripts and wonderful people and a great cast and the most lovely showrunners and executive producers, and it was wonderful. Um, but then I just knew that I've just worked. And when there's work in front of me, I say yes. But this spring, I was like, it's my daughter's senior year, and I actually need to take a risk and take some time off and trust that there's going to be something on the other side of that.
Right.
Um, and so I'm proud of myself for being able to make that choice and not let fear fear of not having the next job come up, not, you know, having enough money to provide or, that if I say no to somebody that it'll be a disconnect and they won't want to work with me next time. All of those kind of things, which, it takes a lot of strength to be able to do a different kind of self-care. And so this was self-care that I really needed. I needed to go home, recharge my batteries, and just be with the family and focus on being a mom for a few months because so much of it has been the juggle of both. And so I'm proud of myself and I'm most proud of the kids that I've raised,
Yeah.
and these beautiful young people as my daughter just graduated and I see the what she's taking out into the world and I see my son and I feel like they both want to work in this industry and but I see the kind of things that they want to do and I feel like I'm most proud of as an artist of that because by me doing it, I think it's offered a certain amount of inspiration to them and also a certain amount of confidence. And that my daughter can see a woman doing these things. And I didn't have there was not a lot of women,
Yeah.
in front of me. And we can name those trailblazers and they're great, but that it's just accepted now that a woman can be a director. When I was on a show that was on for years, and they're like, "Yeah, you should direct. It's just too bad there's no good women directors." And I'd be like, "I know, I know." It's like
Oh
it
my
just,
goodness.
yeah, they would
Yeah.
you can imagine somebody saying that to your face now, but it was said, and it
Yeah.
was just a kind of a different thing. And so, yeah, I guess that's more than one thing that I'm proud of, but it's like that the uh the ability to say no and wait for stuff that is meaningful, as well as the ability to work with others. And I also have a couple of young women that I'm mentoring as well, and that's very rewarding to me. So it's not even something that I'm proud of as much as I'm saying something that like warms my heart. So when you say pride, I think I just translated that into like what warms your heart, because I don't sit around thinking
Yeah.
about, wow, I'm proud of myself, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I love, all of those things serve as inspiration for what you put out in the world. And I think that is definitely like an important part of your Sparkle motherhood mentorship, and kind of just also looking back and realizing that it is to have gratitude towards the work that you're doing, especially when there's so much out of your control right now with the industry. So thank you, Shana, for joining Sparkle On today. I am so excited to see the next season of The Testaments, and all the Boys Universe episodes that are coming out, and anything else that might be behind an NDA.
Yes, yes, more exciting stuff to come next year. Very excited. Thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate the positive messaging that you're putting out into the world. And thank you for what you're doing to share with other artists their sparkle.
Of
So
course,
thank you.
Sparkle On.